But what I wanted to start out by doing is introducing our two inspectors today. We have with us Doug Nelson and Rich Reinart, and I'm going to allow them to give you an introduction for each of themselves, and then we will alternate back and forth between them with our list of questions that they have been able to take a glance at, and they can answer, and then they can, of course, contribute additional information if they would like to. So with that, I guess, Doug, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Cheryl. So my name is Doug Nelson, Nelson Inspection Services, and I have been all of my life an educator. So I started in high school teaching, worked my way up to technical college, moved on to Milwaukee School of Engineering and taught there. Also been involved in two private companies, one of them in the on-site wastewater industry, the other a large pipe, if you will, wastewater engineering firm. So my background, if you didn't pick it up in what I just said, is very heavily water, wastewater treatment, especially small systems, and also more recently been able to pick up all building systems, and so therefore have my home inspector's license as well. So that'll be enough for right now.
Rich, go ahead. You're on mute. We'll go ahead and, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You can rewind what you just said.
Well, my name is Rich Reinart. My company is the Home Inspector LLC. I'm located in Prairie du Sac, and I cover, so I have my home inspector license, also licensed for well and septic, and I cover probably further than I should, but all the way up to Adams County, and then basically all of Southwest Wisconsin as well.
I think all of us with buyers right now can completely understand the amount of area that we cover.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start out with our questions here. More people have joined, so that's awesome. The first question, and we'll start with Rich, since you're still unmuted. Are you seeing an increase in people being able to have an inspection included in their offer right now? For a long time, you probably weren't getting as many inspections because it was so competitive, but are you seeing that increase?
I've seen some increase. I guess it's noticeable, but it hasn't been drastic. And I think a lot of that, when I had talked about, I work in a large area, and because of the well and septic, what I found is when people were still foregoing home inspections, a lot of people were still getting well and septic inspections. A lot of people can kind of look at a house, they bring, a relative or somebody along. But what I've noticed is the well and septic is still, a lot of people don't know much about that. So I stayed pretty busy doing that. But it's definitely, there have definitely been more offers, and I'm busier, home inspection, number of home inspections are up.
Nice. Doug, you're seeing the same?
Yep, same thing. Well and septic, I think Rich hit it right on the head. People really want to know more about that. And the home inspections are beginning to go up. Just happened to read an article this morning that gave the stats for, and you folks all know those numbers better than I do. But the point that they were making is it does appear that it's going to become a buyer's market shortly, if it's not there already.
Excellent. And for those people that are accepting offers with home inspections, Doug, what can a seller do to help prepare their house for a home inspection so that it's easier for you?
There's a couple of things that, and again, unfortunately, it's the buyers that have the home, and they can't, it would be a lovely world if they had all of their things out of the home and we could get at everything in the house. But the reality is they're going to do that. Now, I think one of the best things to make a good impression is critical. And I won't give any details of this location, but I drive by a place every day with a pile of dirt in the front yard with weeds growing up out of it, and things just don't look kept very well. And so the buyers can control whether the inspection is going to come out, or at least improve what's going to come out, by fixing those types of things for that first impression. the bottom line is we're going to look at it all, or at least everything that we can see, and we're going to report on what we see. But having that impression saying, yeah, this house is well taken care of, is really important
for the seller. Rich, anything to add for prep for an easy inspection?
Sure, that's a great topic. I think just readiness, and whether as inspectors we would admit it or not, but when we get to a home and the lights are on, the ceiling fans are running, the home is clean, kind of like Doug was talking about, that presentation, the subconscious is a weird thing. And when I walk into a home like that and the lights are on, and everything's ready to go, I'm like, man, this seller, they're on the ball. They're ready for an inspection. It speeds the inspection up a little bit and also just, education. I would say for the seller's agents, educating the seller. This morning was a perfect example. I wasn't going to do any inspections this morning. That's why I was running a little bit late, but I was, a local one in town came up. I'm like, well, you can always fit one more in. But I get there and the seller was home and I was there a few minutes early. And the seller says, oh, okay. And, I had scheduled on showing time and the seller says, oh, well, what's it going to take you? Hour and a half? And I said, well, 3 hours, they acted as if they had no idea. And I thought, man, it would have been nice if they would know, okay, the inspection was scheduled for this time. This is usually how long it's going to take. So those are the things I know. It's just sometimes as simple as having the lights on and the ceiling fans running and things accessible. Is the attic accessible? Are the electrical panels accessible? The front of the furnace, things like that. It just helps us, speeds us up and makes us happier.
Setting expectations sounds like a big key, though. That is important for both parties.
I'll just jump in on that really quick, Cheryl. Again, we're dealing with the buyer 90% of the time, and getting that information over to the seller is a very valuable thing. I will point out that, Rich, that ruins part of my system. When I go into a room to start the inspection, I turn it on, and when I'm finished at the end of the inspection, I turn the lights off. So that's more humor than anything else.
One thing that's come up sort of in this world of not being able to get inspections through an offer at times are the benefits of doing a pre-inspection on a house prior to listing it. Can you, Rich, comment on that? And also, when you talk about it, can you comment on, I know that there's slightly more information that you're able to give if it's a pre-inspection versus related to a contract.
The first part of the benefits to a pre-inspection, I think it depends on the home. There's homes where that pre-inspection, I had a good answer for this one when I originally read it. In my mind, anyhow, I think a home that's well kept and in better condition, if it's had that home inspection done, I think there's more benefit to it. What I've seen happen sometimes, and this is just working with real estate agents, is when I do a home, that needs some TLC, you go through and you've got a long report, and there's a lot of things, and sometimes that almost can scare people. They say, gosh, there's all these things, even if they fix some of them. So I think that happy medium of homes that are in better condition, it's a hot market where they're more apt to have an offer where somebody looks at it and says, gosh, the home looks pretty good to us. They've had it inspected, and I think a buyer is more comfortable. How the inspection's handled differently, it's not a whole lot different. I like to pick the seller's brain a little bit. You can cheat a little bit. Hey, when was that roof last replaced? Does it make sense with what you're seeing? I'll inspect it the same way, but I'll be honest, I inspect it with more detail. And I always inspect everything the same, but in the back of my mind, I know Doug might be coming behind me and doing another inspection. So so I really, I go through that with my mindset that there may be another inspector that's going to come through to do that inspection. So I inspect it the same as I would. I tell the seller, I'm going to pretend that you're the buyer and I'm going to inspect it just like I would if you were buying this home. But I do always have that in the back of my mind that there might be somebody coming behind me. So I better be darn sure that I do a thorough and good job and take my time.
Doug, comments?
Yeah, I think the timing of it really is important as well. If it's, 3, 4, 5 months before they want to put it on the market, then you're really looking at what things are going to be improved so that this house sells better. And, helping the seller work on what's the critical stuff and what's less critical and so on. And that's really valuable in my experience working with people. Um, I I agree that, having a house that is clearly, you don't have to spend any time in it as a non-inspector when you're in that house and there's a million things that are going to need to be improved. The value probably goes down because they're going to be, especially if it's close to the time they want to list, they can't fix it all. So.
Right, right. Okay. Starting with Doug this time, is it preferred for the buyer and the buyer agent to be in attendance for you? And if so, like the whole thing, and how do you feel about that?
I think it's critical that the buyer be there sometime during the inspection. Yeah, and I'll explain that in just a second. I don't think I'm terribly unusual with this. The buyer's agent is also very valuable because the buyer's agent knows many of the terms and can relay that information and improve the communication between myself and the buyer. The way that I do it is, I tell the person, listen, the first hour, maybe an hour and a half, longer if it's septic and water as well. Those are really boring. Let me get a handle on everything, and then you show up later, whether it's the buyer, the buyer's agent, or whoever. I've in a couple of cases had sellers that wanted to be there as well. So that's sort of how I handled that. And yes, I think that it's critical that they be there. And I'll tell you a secret, there's certain things I can say, but I can't put in my report.
Rich?
Doug nailed it. I mean, that's perfect. I mean, I'm the same way. I'm a talker, and when if the if the buyer, if they want to be there the whole time, they're paying me, and they can, but I tell them up front that I'm going to do a better job for you if I'm able to stay focused and go through the home, and but I really like them there at the end for that walkthrough. Maybe like Doug said, let us get the outside stuff done. Maybe when we get to the inside, so they can see everything that we're going through and doing, but. No, I follow the same routine as what Doug does.
Excellent. Andrea, you have a question or a comment?
I just have a comment as a realtor. When I first started out, it was back when it was a really strong buyer's market and buyers used to load on everything from the inspection report. And obviously now that's swayed 180 degrees different. But this works for listing agents and buyer's agents. I always preface it that the inspection's to find major defects, but also it's an educational opportunity. And especially first-time home buyers, to be able to go through a home with you guys, and you're not going to just identify defects. You're going to say, this is maintenance you can do yourself in the springtime or whatever. I think that's really important, and it makes the inspection go smoother. So buyers don't go, gosh, he's bringing up all this stuff and I need to make an issue out of all of it. So I think that helps some of the new agents.
I completely agree. And, having owned 6 houses, I always learn something.
Yes.
As I said, I'm an educator, and that's what I feel the role of the home inspector really is. So, and I know Rich thinks that way too.
Well, and we all know that for our first-time home buyers, oftentimes they will listen to the inspector more than they will listen to their parents. So it's helpful to get that information from you guys. Okay, Doug, the word defect is a very gray area at times. And I know sometimes, buyers or people will jump on that word and, the sky is falling. I know also there are times where your software requires you to call something a defect that maybe is not necessarily a sky is falling type defect, but can you kind of comment on that and what people should be doing to help buyers translate those reports?
Yeah, in my mind, what is a defect and what isn't a defect is not that gray. What is the gray word in the definition is they tuck the word significant into the definition. So if it's a significant defect, then we report it as a defect. And I don't know how we work through that, because Rich is going to identify certain things as significant and I wouldn't, and vice versa. It's interesting when we I go to the training every year that we have, and we have an actual house that we inspect, and there's other people inspecting it, and some people call things defects and I don't. I'll tell you where my line is absolute is when it's a safety issue. No ground fault interrupters in the kitchen and things like that I read it. No fire not fire suppression, excuse me, fire alarm systems. Those are the ones that I am just absolute on. And I'll just say very briefly, the age of the house has some. I think we got another question coming up on this, but the age of the house is part of what we're talking about, because houses age and in some ways they become less safe. So I'll leave it at that. Let Rich take it over.
Yeah, Rich, comment on that?
I'll be honest. When that rule change was taking place, at first I was very hesitant. I'm like, maybe I'm old fashioned, but I was like, wait, why are we changing things? And and then once the change happened, I've really liked it. And knock on wood, I've had very little problems. Whether I list something as a defect or needing repair, I like it. It's been smooth sailing. So I'm glad that it aligns more with what's in the offer to purchase. I think that's very helpful and it makes sense. So I was hesitant at first, but I'm glad that change has happened. So I just wanted to mention that. Things that call a defect, yeah, I mean, safety related, that's the easy one. There's times it can vary on whether it's safety, even the severity of an item. If I come across one window on the outside of a home, let's say the framing has a little bit of wood rot, at that point I would tell by, it's a repair. You've got some wood rot here, but now if I go around and there's 8, there's 10, it becomes where almost all the windows have wood rot. I bump it up to a defect at that point because it's more, although we don't talk in numbers, it's more of a significant repair at that point. So that's kind of how I've worked it. Is safety is an easy one because anything safety related is a defect, and then from then on, if a furnace isn't working properly, big ticket items that aren't functioning properly, as defects. That's how I've worked it, and it's gone really well.
Excellent.
Oh, can I slide something else in here?
Please.
I think everybody knows that we have to report those defects in a summary. I would hope that everybody's picked up on that over the last year and a half. What many people don't know, they think that it's only defects that go in the summary, and that's not true. There are actually 5 categories that we are required to put into that summary. So if it is not a maintenance item, but a monitor item, something people should be watching, or if it's further evaluation, someone else needs to take a look at it beyond what I can do. And so that's 5 categories that go into that summary sheet, and they are not just the defects that go in that summary. I think that's important to know, and I didn't see that in any of the other questions.
No, but I think that kind of goes back to that gray area, because I know for sometimes my buyers look at that summary as being everything on this summary list must be the most important, and I need to ask for that stuff. And that's where I think sometimes it gets a little gray, where we have to say, no, look at the actual, code for the key of the color or the words or whatever it happens to be on somebody's system, and understand that that just means that it should be looked at, or it needs to be maintained, or whatever the case is. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a showstopper. So I think that's fair. explanation. So Rich, do you ever have to do a reinspection? And if so, what would cause somebody to have a reinspection?
Very, I try to avoid them, to be honest. I do them, if it's minor items. But what I tell people is, if they, in our report, it'll say, recommend a qualified contractor, evaluate and repair. And when I get that phone call, I'll first ask them, well, if a qualified contractor did the repair and they've got a paid receipt showing that, that's your proof that it was properly repaired because a professional did their job. But I have one, I think it's a private sale, and it was a plumbing vent, the neoprene boot around, it's all deteriorated. So the buyer called me and said, hey, can you what's your cost to reinspect? And I asked them everything. Well, here they had fixed it themselves. So, everything was pretty loosey-goosey. It's one of these where the seller's like, go ahead, if you guys want to fix it, they fixed it. But the bank is still requiring a proof for somebody to reinspect it to make sure it's fixed properly and it's not leaking. So in that case, I said, sure, that's fine. I can jump up on the roof again and take a look at it. So I do small items like that. If it gets into bigger things, foundation, structural work, things like that, I don't have the background to go look at it necessarily on some of those items to say, hell yeah, this is now structurally sound. That gets above my pay grade. So yep, I do them but very few. And it's because of that reason. If a qualified contractor is used, the repair, that's the reassurance that it's done correctly.
That makes sense. Doug, anything to add for that one?
No, I agree, right down the line pretty much. There are a few situations where I have offered to come back and look at something. And in most cases, it's because I couldn't see it well. And so therefore I had to report not inspected. But if we were able to arrange something and get another look at whatever it is, I would offer that. And typically those are pretty close to home.
Well, and just as an example where I can attest to that was like a septic pump where the septic needed to be pumped in order for you to see it better. Was an example, just in case anybody's thinking of what would that be. Okay. Sometimes clients, sellers that haven't sold in a long time, or people that are just not familiar with inspections will think that they are pass fail. How do you answer that type of comment? Did I pass my inspection?
You
want it, Rich, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, I'll say that.
Go ahead.
That's a question you get daily, isn't it? Go ahead. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Unlike the septic inspections in particular, and the well inspections are closer to a pass-fail, the home inspection is what we see. It's a report of what we see, and that's very specifically called out in the code. And so I have never asked. I've never severely corrected a client when they tried to pull the not pass thing, but it just isn't that way.
Rich, any additional thoughts on that one?
Yep. I mean, it's again education. I just let them
Right.
know, it's not a pass or a fail. Home inspectors are different than a municipal inspector, that can red tag something and say, hey, this has to be fixed prior to occupancy. And lots of times I'll tell them, everyone has different backgrounds. There's times I'll be doing an inspection and I come across something I think is fairly major, and the buyer will be doing the walkthrough and the buyer's like, oh no, I know somebody for that. We're not worried about it. And it's always a good reminder as an inspector that our job is to inspect and report, because we don't know their backgrounds. We don't know anything, we generally don't know the buyers, so our job is just report what we see and then take it, give it to the buyers, and then they take it from there, because you never know. Like I said, there's been times I think something I'm like, oh gosh, I'm kind of thinking in my head, that's a big deal. And they're not worried about it. They've seen it and they have somebody and they already have a game plan with that. So, I tell them sometimes it's more of what can you live with, what can you not, really, than pass or fail.
Everybody's tolerance is different for sure. While you're at it, Rich, do you prefer that a septic system be pumped prior to you inspecting it?
I do not. So when I do a septic inspection, and the reason I don't like it pumped prior is that I want to be able to run water, watch it come into the septic tank, and then out to the drain field. So that's how I've done it. I mean, ideally, to be honest, I mean, ideally, it would be great, you know, if the tank was full, and then, you know, I looked at everything like that, you know, ran water through the system, and then they pumped it, and then checked, you know, everything again. But at the end of the day, I don't have the time to coordinate with all the different pumpers and all the different areas that I work at. And then, you know, depending on their schedule, if they're there on time. So I found for me, I'm like, you know, when it comes to time, that's the best for me, is that I don't have it pumped. I want to see it working under normal conditions. Like I said, water coming from the home to the septic tank and out to the drain field.
Excellent. And Doug, do you feel the same?
Pretty much. I would love for it to be pumped while I'm there. That's the ideal situation. And the biggest thing is you get a really good look at the roof of the tank, which is where the most deterioration can happen. And so that's the purpose for that. I do most of them without, and here's what Rich and I run up against. If I require the pump out, the cost of the pump out is the cost of the pump out. Many of the people who do the pump outs are also certified to do the inspections. And so the cost is significantly more if we end up doing the pump out while I'm there. So that's the only thing that I'll add to what Rich said. The state, the organization that does do the training for these inspections does say that they would like it pumped. But again, it's got to be a pretty unusual unusual situation for me to require it.
Okay. So that septic question kind of jumped in the middle of there. I thought I actually had those organized a little better, so I apologize. But let's go back to the inside of the house. And can you tell me, Doug, about appliances? And do you test the appliances, like turn on the burners and run the dishwasher and all that stuff?
Not all that stuff. My feeling is you don't really learn anything from running the dishwasher. And that's something that absolutely should be reported in the offer. But what I would say is I turn the burners on the stove and make sure. And if it's one that you can see that they're working, I take a picture of it just to prove that it was working on that day. And part of that is you're testing either the electrical system or the gas system at that point as well. But most appliances, I don't spend the time doing that. I had one inspector that I worked with at one point that had a little glow stick to throw into the, and it's part of the show of, see, it does work if the buyer is standing right there when you're doing it. So I think that's valuable for the education, less valuable for what you're really learning out of it.
Rich, do you do the same?
I do test all the appliances, like washer and dryer. I mean, I will test those sometimes, but we're not required to. You know what I mean? It's one of those we're not required to. I tend to do it because in my mind, I'm like, if I don't run that dishwasher, they're gonna start it up and it's gonna be, you know, screeching and making all kinds of noises. Same with the dryer. You know, if I find out the washer and dryers especially, we don't know if they're staying with the property or going. The kitchen, I generally will test everything. I don't, you know, I don't do the light stick, you know, like Doug said. I like with the microwave. I've seen those too, and you know, it's kind of like the smoke pens sometimes too. It's just more than show than anything else. So I generally do test everything. Unless I know, like I said, the washer and dryer, if they're not staying, then I won't test those.
With that in mind, though, a lot of people worry about the ages of appliances and mechanicals. And obviously, we all kind of agree that as things have more recently, they don't last quite as long. What do you feel like there's any sort of guideline that we can, a guideline to share with buyers about, you know, the age for, you know, furnace, water softener, water heater, those kinds of things? And to double up on that, how can you tell what the age is when sometimes it seems like it's built into this, the number on it instead of, you know, the serial number instead of just being blatant? I feel like it should just be on it.
Am I up or is Rich up?
I think we're starting with Rich this time.
Yeah, why do they do that? Why isn't that? It should be, isn't it? Shouldn't it just be like an obvious thing? Like, here's the number. Like, this is how the date stamp on it.
What are they hiding?
Yeah, they don't want to know because when it only lasts 10 years, they don't want it to know it's yeah. So to decode, most inspectors use I think it's at buildingintelligence.org is the one that I normally would use. I'm just double checking it right now. I think that's the one when I Google it. Yeah, so if that's something you want to write down, if you're curious about it, it's a really good website. Building Intelligence Center. So it's building-center.org. And it has everything and anything, mostly I use it for HVAC. I don't age dishwashers, ovens, those. I don't do that, but so for me, I do the furnace, AC, water heater. Those are the three that I make sure I have an age on. And as far as for when does it become on my report, I'll put it after a certain age, I put it as a monitor. I'll tell the buyer, listen, the furnace, AC, they're working fine, but it's a 15-year-old furnace. You get to 20 plus years nowadays, you're getting to be on borrowed time. But it's so hard. There's furnaces we'll test them. They might be 30, 35 years old and they're working just fine, and they might go another 10 years. You have a furnace, some of them are done at 15, so it varies greatly. But that's kind of my sweet spot. Water heaters are all over the place depending on the water quality and such. So any water heater over 10 years of age, I tell them, I have it as a monitor. Furnaces, I usually do about 15 years. And then AC is a little bit less, maybe 12 years, where I say, hey, it's working fine, but it's starting to show its age. Hopefully I answered that, it gave some insight on how I do aging.
I love websites. That's awesome. Okay.
Good.
Comments,
And-
Doug?
And Rich, I think you hit the chart that there's standard charts out there that talk about what is the typical age range of all of these different mechanicals. And I really like to look at the maintenance records because that's what the big difference is. And I'll take it out of the appliance or the mechanicals area and put it into the on-site wastewater area. I have lived in homes where the on-site system was 40 years old. And I've lived in homes that it was 5 years old and was failing. The 40-year-old wasn't, but the 5-year-old was. And so it is all over the place. The best we can do is give it's X number of years old, or it was installed or manufactured at this time. And taking that serial number and putting it into the program Rich talks about is about the only way you can get that number. If they don't put it, Rheem water heaters, they list it nicely on theirs.
Doug, with that said, one of the conversations that came up while we were preparing for this is there a requirement to test the CO output on the outside of the house for a Wisconsin furnace?
That is considered what is called a technically extensive inspection at that point, and that is beyond what home inspectors are required to do and are actually licensed to do. Their license doesn't cover that area. So now, with that said, if you are trained in that area, you can inspect it, and so many do. I would rather, before they're checking the carbon monoxide on the exhaust of the furnace, I would sooner see people inspecting the gas lines within the dwelling for leakage. And I've caught a couple of those that were quite serious.
Andrea, did you have an additional question?
I was going to say, has that rule changed in, say, the last 15 years, that requirement for home inspectors, or no? No.
Not that I know of. Rich, you've been doing it a little bit longer than I.
Not that I know of. That's been the same. Same thing. I know some inspectors that test it, and I kind of, we're not required to, and I've started actually stating it in my report that it's outside the standards of practice to test that. What can happen is there's certain types of furnaces you have to know how long to run them. If you don't run them long enough, it's going to give you a false reading. And I've just decided I don't want to be, giving false reports. You know what I mean? So I have stayed away from it as it's not required.
Thank you.
Is it inappropriate to ask if an inspector is doing that? Is it inappropriate to ask if they're like trained on doing it? Like, are there people out there that just buy the tool and they do it assuming, as being an extra, assuming that they're being helpful, but they haven't actually been trained to understand, like Rich said, the difference between the furnaces and this actually, I guess there was an inconsistency within a house, which is what brought up the conversation, but understanding that some people are trained in it and some people aren't, is that something that should be asked?
I would hope that the inspector, if they're going to test it, they have been trained. And part of that training is knowing how to see the differences in those different heating systems and which ones require a longer heat up period and so on. When I sold my house recently, the guy did it. He tested it, but he worked for a multi-person firm, and the boss really knew HVAC systems inside and out. So
Okay, interesting. So now we need to get a rule put in place that you can't buy one of those meters unless you've passed an exam.
that's the ethics of it.
Uh-huh. Rich, how do you explain to people the difference between not being current code and the code that was required when it was built, which comes up a lot because obviously we still have some houses with knob and tube wiring and different fuse box situations. And how do you explain that to people? Because I've had buyers comment, well, this needs to be changed before you buy it. Not so much.
Correct. Yeah, I explain it to them. I say, listen, this met the standard at the time. So I'll use that term a lot. It met the standard at the time. It's so common. Let's say a garage not having garage was built in the 50s and doesn't have GFCI outlets. It's important to let them know, okay, this garage when they built this, it wasn't required. Now I still recommend it because it's safety. So it'll still go down in the report as safety. But it wasn't, make sure I word this correctly. It wouldn't be required, it wouldn't be required to be updated to today's standards unless you were doing a full remodel. If you're remodeling something and things are being done, then things have to be brought up to code. But if it's been that way since 1960, it's fine. I mean, a two-prong receptacle in a home is still acceptable. Say that 3 times fast. So again, it's a two-prong, and they're gonna complain because there's no ground plug. But I tell them, it's only a hot and neutral, and that's acceptable. You can still buy those at the hardware store. It met the standard at the time. But if it's safety related, then I put it down. So it didn't, it doesn't meet today's standard. But if it's a safety concern, that's why it's still in the report.
Where does that fall with railings?
With what?
Railings.
Oh, railings. Oh, great. Yeah, great question. Yeah, with railings. I run it all the time with Victorian homes, right? I'll see that and go to the upstairs.
They come up to your knee.
Yeah, it comes up to your knee. I mean, I'm more of a people person, so like hopefully the buyer is there, and I'll tell them, listen, okay, we know this doesn't meet today's code, but are you going to change it? Probably not, because that's the aesthetics of the home. I mean, that's what makes this why you're buying it, the character, right, of that home. But I want them to know that it doesn't meet today's standards. And it's going to come up if they go to sell someday. It may come up. Yeah, railings. I put it down. Just depends on the type of railing. How high is it? do they have, are there going to be small children there? Or, you know, if it's really wide, it's safety. You know, if the baluster spacing super wide, I'm going to have it down. And then I'll leave it in their ballpark, whether that's something that they will change or not. So make sure it's safe for them, that they understand that it doesn't meet today's code. But if they want to keep it because it's the character of the home, you know, it's up to them, at least at that point.
Right, makes sense. How did we all survive?
Yeah,
Doug, did you have any
right.
comments on that?
I'll just add that this last part you're talking about, decks,
Oh.
most decks are not up to code. Either they were built by the homeowner and they didn't know what the code was, or any variety of different things. So you'll see that comment a lot. And again, we try to explain to the buyer, this is acceptable because it was previous code, but new code wouldn't allow this, so that they're prepared when they have to go replace it. The one thing that I always make sure to put into my reports is this GFCI thing, and outlets that were converted. Rich talked about, you know, going from ungrounded to grounded systems. Having an ungrounded outlet, I think everybody knows the 3-prong means that it's grounded. Having a 3-prong outlet that people would then think is grounded, but in reality, all they did was replace into an ungrounded situation. And those are the safety things that I get really excited about, because I want to make sure that thing doesn't happen. Somebody doesn't get a good shock because I missed it or I didn't write it.
That makes sense. And Doug, while you're at it, what are the rules for when you can inspect a roof?
The rule is you can always inspect a roof.
Okay, with cleats?
So when will you see people who don't? My roof that I'm sitting under right now is a steel roof, and it's a relatively steep for a steel roof, and so therefore I wouldn't get on it. My inspector that inspected this house didn't get on it, but that doesn't mean you don't inspect it. And as far as I'm concerned, you always have to inspect the roof, whether it's with binoculars, whether it's with a drone, or whether it's actually walking on the roof. So there is no requirement for an inspector to walk on the roof. In fact, it specifically says if the inspector feels that it is an unsafe thing to do, then they don't. Is a drone inspection permitted now? It is for exterior features. So, I was doing an inspection with my drone, and it decided to go home and land, and I no longer have that drone. So,
Okay. Rich, other comments on the roof inspection?
Just, you know, for me, you know, if it's a really steep roof, you know, material, like Doug said, if it's a material that I'm not going to walk on or it's too steep, the only other time
Ice.
I don't the roof is ice, and if it's got a foot of snow on it, it always seems like the buyer. I had several this last winter. As soon as, you know, we had a mild winter, but when we did have snow, the roof was the most important thing to them, and I always laughed because I'm like, I can't see it any more than you can, you know. But
Right.
like, we're really concerned about the roof. But then, you know what, there are different things. We can see it from the attic, we can see from underneath. You know, there's still things you can do to inspect a roof without actually being on it. But I mean, I know some inspectors, you know, they'll shovel off or they'll remove snow on a section of it, and I don't do that. And the reason is because I tell them I could remove a 3x4 foot section, and 1 foot over there's a shingle missing. You know, you have to. It's a further eval type situation. So that's the only time I don't get on a roof, is, you know, type of material too steep, or obviously if it's snow and ice covered.
That makes sense. Obviously you have to do some continuing education in order to maintain your inspector's license, but Rich, can you tell us a little bit about that? What do you need to do to do that? Is that an annual thing, biannually, like ours is?
No, ours is biannual, 40 hours of continuing education. And you have to, obviously stay in good standing with that. I'm trying to think, once you're licensed, if it's any other requirements besides the continuing education, and not that I can think of offhand, and I should probably know that for sure, right? But yeah, our license is renewed biannually, and it's 40 hours per year though, so it'd be 80 hours. If I'm thinking of that correctly, maybe Doug can back me up on it. I think it's 40 hours annually, and it's renewed biannual.
Okay,
Yeah, it's 20 hours and 40 for the biennium for us. But I wanted to jump in on the 40 hours. So I am also a licensed professional engineer and obviously have to do continuing education for that. My requirement for that, the system is not perfect, is where I'm headed with this. My requirements for continuing ed for a professional engineer are 30 hours. So for this, I have to do 40. And Rich, this one will be interesting for you. I just got relicensed as an on-site system maintainer, a POUT system maintainer, and that's 12. So I'm not sure where 12 comes from. So the point is that that isn't the big thing. I will say that being a member of the Home Inspectors Association and getting good, valuable information through that organization is really the critical point as far as I'm concerned. And if one does that, participates in meetings and goes to the annual convention, or actually we have two a year, that's where you get the valuable information, whether it's part of your CE or not.
some people on this call might do commercial sales. Do either of you inspect commercial buildings?
I do not.
I do. I feel that's because of the experience over the last few years at Milwaukee School of Engineering. I know those systems probably a little bit better than the home systems. So my order of expertise in my mind is septic systems, because I've been doing that for so long, probably commercial systems just ahead of homes, and then wells. Rich, you can disagree with me on this. Well inspections are really straightforward. So
Excellent. And Doug, we'll start with you. What is the strangest thing you've seen so far during an inspection?
I've seen a lot
And
of
maybe
strange
if it's
things.
related to septics, people should put their lunch away.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, I could. No, we won't do that. So what's strange in my world is if you see several things in one location. So in one location, as I'm doing my initial walkthrough, there is this cage that you would think either a gorilla, a monkey, or a small child might be kept in. And I asked, and it was for cats.
Oh boy.
And that was weird thing number one. I go down in the basement, and I'm not terribly tall, right? I'm under 6 foot, but I had to bend over by a foot so that I didn't hit my head on the ceiling of the basement. This is a little weird. So the current owner was there, and I said, "Why is this quite so short?" And he says, "Oh boy, the best thing I ever did was put 2 feet of concrete in the basement." So he built it up 2 feet so that he could be above the water table, and he still needed 2 sump pumps to keep it going. And his system worked. So there wasn't anything that I could write up on this thing at all. But it was none of those 3 things were part of the home inspection, really.
Interesting. And some cement company is very thankful for all the money. Rich, how about you?
It's so hard to nail down. And one thing, I mean, the people get really creative with electrical. I mean, so that some of the fun electrical stuff we all get to see. And I say all of us, I mean, that are on this call, because you see things walking around the home whether you're doing a listing or you're looking at it, and you're like, oh, that's creative. the other part I'll just say is that the people flush unique things down the toilet, and we get to see it in the septic tanks. I mean, it's bizarre to me how many times there's things going in there that anything that should, or things that are going in there that shouldn't. So biodegradable items I just put in the report and it should get pumped. But I had a property where they had um a toilet kind of in I don't know if it's like a garage or outbuilding, and I'm like, gosh, that's odd. I don't see anything else coming into the septic tank. And I'm like, well, it kind of looks like it comes this way. And we followed it out to the woods about 200 feet, and it was just straight pipe right out to the woods. So number ones and number twos, everything was just going down to the woods down the hill.
That's
And
fantastic.
lake homes that are just charging gray water out to the lake, things like that, where I had a home, very high-end home, and somebody had gone through the time and they had replumbed. I was in the crawl space underneath, and they had replumbed all the gray water to go to the exterior, and it was very steep, so there was a little valley, and all the gray water, we started running things, and all the stubs were on the main stack. I mean, the main drain line. So, they had to rehook everything back up so that it would go out to the holding tanks, which is why they had done it, because they had holding tanks and they didn't want to pump them as often. But I'm like, gosh, that's a lot of work to
Oh my
convert everything
goodness.
over just so it could drain out to the lake. So now I don't swim in lakes anymore either.
Go to the very middle if you do. Okay, sometimes, speaking of being by lakes and rivers and such, sandpoint wells come up, and that for some buyers is a turnoff and makes them uneasy. I don't know if both of you or one of you have experience with sandpoint wells that you can shed a little light on why it's not necessarily a concern, so that we can help explain that to buyers.
I see both sides of this issue. The state's concern is that sandpoint wells are in a strata where water is going to transmit very quickly. So if there's something that ends up being dumped on the surface, it's going to contaminate the well. So the real question is, I mean, they're typically fairly high producing wells and so on. So they're very good from a water supply basis, but may be contaminated. And the answer to that, as far as I'm concerned, and here's the way that you can soothe it with your clients, is test your water regularly. And you don't have to test for everything under the sun. It's probably going to be either bacteria or nitrates in this state that are going to be there. That's what you're looking for. And at that point, it's contaminated, and then you deal with it.
How often do you suggest sandpoint or otherwise testing water in a well?
I'm sorry, Rich. I'm so excited. Every single time the house is transferred, if it's on a well, it should be tested. You want to know what you're starting with as a new home buyer. Whether you have a well inspection or not, it should be tested.
But what if you've been living in a house for, say, 20 years? Should somebody periodically get their water tested?
Yep, the water testing labs, they all suggest, and then the DNR as well, they suggest annually, or obviously if there's a change in color, smell, any changes in your water, but annually, and then otherwise, if there's any changes, you should have it tested.
Okay. Rich, do you recommend, I have a contact that actually gets a home inspection every 5 or 6 years just for their own home maintenance perspective. Is that something you guys recommend to homeowners in general?
I haven't. I think it's an interesting idea, because there are some people that do, and I'm trying to think. It's been a long time since I've had one where they called and just said, hey, can you just go through the home, unless they were thinking about selling, that's usually the most common. I mean, would I recommend it? I mean, I'm a home inspector, so sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, annually you should have your home inspected.
Yeah, right.
But inspection home regularly. Did you mention 5 years? I mean, if it was something where it was set up, would it need it annually? I wouldn't say annually, like regularly. But if you had somewhere, some people move so much nowadays, but if you had somewhere where they were living in a home for 10, 15, 20 years, you know what? It wouldn't be a bad idea after 5 years, maybe to have somebody go through it and and look at it, because it's like anything. We get used to where we live, and that's just how that is. And it's refreshing sometimes to get another set of eyes on it, to look at it, and then it's kind of eye-opening for the seller, or not necessarily seller, for the homeowner in this case, to say, oh gosh, I guess I never really thought of that. That's just how it's always been, or what's happened. And it's the other areas, just like a home inspection for a buyer. I tell people, it's not, generally you don't have to worry about, it's not what you can see, it's what you can't see. What's in the attic, what's in that crawl space, what's the panel look like, the electrical panel, when you open it up. So sometimes the scariest parts are the things that you can't see, during a showing, because you're not able to access it. So not to get off too much on a tangent, but I know there are some inspectors that have kind of looked at that avenue as a way to increase business, to say, you should have a regular inspection. And so I would agree that, yeah, it isn't a bad idea. Once every 5 years, it would make sense to do that from a maintenance
The
standpoint.
person that commented on it uses it as their sort of tickler list of budgeting for their home maintenance. And,
Yep.
prioritizing.
Yeah. How does the roof look? If you got up there, yeah, the roof's starting to get older, and you're like, gosh, yeah, maybe we better start saving for it or hope for hail. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, we're at our 1 hour mark, but the last thing I wanted to wrap up with was, do either one of you have any suggestions for resources for agents to educate themselves on any of the things we talked about, septic or well? I know, Doug, you gave me a couple of website links that I think, Tanya, can we email those out to the people?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. Anything
So-
else though?
So 3 sources, one for each of those. One of the files that I attached there is the state regulations for home inspectors. And so that has in it exactly what we are required to look for and what we're not required to look for. The second one was the state of Wisconsin's well information page that's built specifically for homeowners. And then the other link was an organization called WAWRA. No, actually, I subbed that. The SPS, same, we're all licensed by the same group, right? They have a site that's dedicated for homeowners information about on-site pout systems. So those are the 3 things you're going to be getting. There are several others out there, but I think those 3 stood out in my mind. They'd be really good.
Excellent. Rich, any other suggestions?
No, those that Doug mentioned were good. I was thinking of, the 3 organizations. Doug and I are both members of WAHI. This will be my quick plug for WAHI, Wisconsin Association of Home Inspectors. It's something, if you think about it, if you're looking at using a different inspector, or maybe the one you had retired, or something that just you're not happy with them, that you're referring, ask the inspector if are they a member of WAHI. There's things that WAHI sends out to all of the inspectors that if you're not a member of, you're kind of out of the loop. So there's that organization. WAWRA is the septic organization in Wisconsin. And then the Wisconsin Water Well Association is the other one. So, and all of those have, if you Google any one of those 3, they have resources on their pages that would then, like Doug said, get you to the SPS. But that's a great, to go right to the source, like Doug mentioned, that SPS resource is perfect, because that's the meat of it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you guys both so much for your time. Tanya, I will get that information to you so we can send it out to the group. From a perspective of Southwest, we are trying to bring more and more opportunities for knowledge to the Southwest. And so we're thankful that all of you attended today. We also would greatly appreciate any feedback or emails giving topics of things that you would like brought to you, so that we can bring things that people are going to attend to both in person and online, because we want to continue to grow knowledge in the Southwest area. And we really are looking to you guys for your input on that. So thank you very, very, very much, all of you. Thank you to Rich and Doug for taking time out of your day. And we'll be sending out contact information for Rich and Doug as well.